about this morning and using it in your facility and environment. So what is in the moment planning? Well, in the moment planning, it's an approach that allows children to do what they want, how they want, for as long as they want. And as I was saying that to you, you're probably thinking that just sounds like chaos. Well, there is some method behind it, but what it does help is to understand that the spark or the wow moment we have with the child, and additionally looking at that teachable moment. And you are probably using some of the elements of this already in your teaching, but you are not explicitly naming it. So let's have a look at the in the moment planning, which looks at taking away pre-planned ideas and literally going with the flow with the child's interest. So in the moment planning means that we are taking every moment of curiosity and interest and making it into a teachable moment. So this strategy is where you, the practitioner or the teacher, can carefully observe how that children are using the equipment that they have in their play facility and going deep into a moment of opportunity, curiosity, and also a way for them to get into that trajectory of deep learning. So instead of planning everything to have desired outcomes, what we are doing is having everything there with open flow in the environment so that the child can just go with what they are interested in. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we move along. So again, does this strategy work? Yes, it does. It can take a little bit time to understand how to document it because there is documentation involved in it, but also it is a child-led approach to learning. And it's quite easy and simple to understand once you understand how you can document it, how the children navigate it, but also what it does bring is independence to learning and giving children a deep interest in what they are doing at that moment. So sometimes the spontaneous, unplanned moment of learning and curiosity can have more impact than if we have pre-planned it, and also if we have set up for organized learning outcomes that often don't happen. So let's take a deeper look. So babies and young children are experience learning in the here and now. They're not storing up their questions for tomorrow or for next week. What they're doing is that curiosity is that moment right there when they are playing with something. And it could be something they've played with over and over again, but they're using it in a different way. But also what we're looking at is that teachable moment when we have that deep understanding that children are curious about what they're doing. And also they are enjoying that moment of puzzlement when they're looking at the same thing that they have probably used before, a toy, but they're looking at it in a new way. But also this cycle of being able to observe children in this new way and how they are putting in the effort to use with the toy can also mean that we are looking at the interest, the spark, the wow moment. But also for us as a teacher, what we are thinking about is observation. And we're thinking about what this tells us about the child's thinking in that moment. And that's our assessment. And also the appropriate strategies to help a child. Because as I mentioned with the opening slide, it could sound like chaos. But what we are doing is asking the right question to get the child onto the next level of thinking and also to promote that moment of curiosity and expanding that, extending that, and using phrases like I wonder and what if, and getting the child to think through the problem. So it is a slightly different approach in that we are going with what children understand in their play rather than us setting it up for what we understand and want. It can be a big jump from having an organized play set into one where you're letting them go with the flow, but equally it can have some amazing results. So we're going to delve in a little bit more. We don't have a great deal of time to go deeply into this theory, but What does it mean? What it means is that we have a greater understanding of how children are learning. We often set up different themes and topics that children navigate around, but a lot of these don't have any use to children in their practical day-to-day learning. They are important, so I'm not dismissing these, but what we want to do is get children to understand their way of learning. We all know that children learn in different ways. We all have different emerging learning styles at this stage, but also how children gravitate to schematic play and also different ways of play is their way of learning. If a child has that moment of curiosity, what it does do is we see the teachable moment where we can extend that and also engage in quality interactions, and we can record the progress that each child has made. What are the gains for using in the moment planning is that children then become very secure in their trajectory. And also what it does mean is that that learning and teachable moment has more impact rather than just going from one corner or one activity to another. Not really sure how children are engaging or using the equipment we put out. The skill set needed, well, we'll talk a little bit about that later on in what is needed for you as the practitioner, but also how children move on with this. Now, one of the questions I often get asked about using in the moment planning is do you use it all the time? Well, yes, it's one of those things that if you're going to adopt it, you have to really embrace it, but do it over a period of time. And how that has happened in settings, we'll discuss a little bit towards the end of the session. But more than anything is how you, as the practitioner or the teacher, step back and understand that it's not losing control or chaos, but what it is doing is creating a better learning environment for the child. So my question is anyone using in the moment approach in their teaching? Well, you're very welcome to put in the chat box if you are. But as I mentioned with the opening slide, that you probably are using elements of this already. If you are working in early years or in primary, what you probably are doing is when you are teaching a concept or you're in the classroom, is stepping back when you realize that the child is just at that point of sorting out the answer, finding a solution, or looking at the problem in a different way. It's critical that you don't step in too quickly and give them the wrong direction. You want them to look at the problem and work out how to resolve it. And this is one of the things with in the moment planning. It often works well with things like loose parts theory, where children are given the tools to be able to move around and use the equipment and keep editing their way they use what is in their environment. They can go back to using the same resources again, but edit how they used it the day before, and it can have a different learning outcome. One of the things that children do become is curious and develop problem-solving skills in this environment because of the comfort of reusing this, having open flow, but also that you are guiding them as the practitioner. So these are crucial moments, and the spark starts when you recognize as the practitioner that the child has got an interest. They're beginning to become highly animated around an object, and as you can see here in the screen, it's a brick, but that brick can become anything. In that child's moment there, it becomes anything. But also they become fascinated with not only what it is, but what it can become, and also the concentration that comes with that. As a practitioner, this is your moment with the teachable moment to be able to go in and recognize the spark and move on with a question such as I wonder and what if and maybe, generating that interest. Now you're probably thinking, well, this sounds like a one-to-one kind of setting where there's very few children. And how do you navigate this when you have children in a class? Well, it's one of those things that you do become skilled at. And as we move through this short session, explaining how you do that when you have a large quantity of children. But part of the training for in the moment planning is recognizing that you don't have to worry too much about addressing every child when they see the spark, because some children may want you just to step back and leave them go through that moment when they're able to just go through the curiosity of what do I have, how am I going to use it, and maybe just disregard it. But the most pivotal point to in the moment planning is that wow moment. That wow moment when suddenly the child, in that moment of curiosity and puzzlement or effort or interest, the teachable moment, that skillful adult can make the difference by asking, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use this? And understanding that the child is thinking of alternative ways to use something that has probably been in the setting, but also using, as an adult, using the right strategies to continue with this. So it's also, there is some planning involved with in the moment planning, but not like before. When we think about documenting the wow moment, you do this after the session. So whereas with the early years foundation stage, we put a lot of planning in what we want to do, the desired outcomes, what we're looking for, maybe photographic evidence. What we're doing with in the moment planning is we've reversed that around. And you are writing down your observations after the session. And again, this reversal is quite a quick process. It's the child, what they were doing and where they were doing it, and what you noticed that spark or that level of interest or curiosity was, and how did you intervene and help with that. More than anything, it's how you build on that as well. By not changing the setting, but changing your questions that you ask with the child. It's about planning for the next moment. So that wow moment, well, we record the wow moments for all children. Does that seem like a lot of work? Not really, because we do have to keep information about children. We do have to record their activities. But doing it this way, it's in a more of a note form. And it's acceptable for Ofsted because we are looking at the curiosity, the puzzlement, the engagement, and also the outcomes of the child. If we're looking at something like making a cake, a group activity in a class where children could be all working together, or the activity that you have started invites children to come and participate. We're observing what happens next. What goes with the flow? What happens when the children start working together? You are working with the children's responses and engaging with that. So again, there's no preconceived outcome to something like baking a cake. You are facilitating it, but you also go with what the children are saying, how they organize themselves, and also the observations to show the next steps in learning. And the more you do this, you can become skilled at it rather than having preconceived ideas on how you want the activity to end. It can often be an exciting process where you just start with it and see where it goes and what the children bring to that activity. And then that prepares you for further in the moment planning in the future. It can be an exciting way to get children engaged, but also for you as a practitioner, this teachable moment is the opportunity to extend their interest by asking the open-ended questions, but also providing quality learning experiences. What we are doing is observing how children learn in their own emerging learning style, but also it gets them to promote their thinking skills by asking what happens next. And just like I mentioned about making a cake, we could go back to that activity, and again, it could promote a different outcome. Now, you might be saying, well, we do this with the early years foundation stage planning. What's different? The different is your desired outcomes. When you are doing an activity, you may decide, well, if we're going to do this, I want boom, boom, boom. I want these three things, and I want to see the children demonstrating that. If you can imagine, if we're using that activity and we're saying, let's see what my observations bring and how I can plan for that in the next session that we have. Again, also, the desired outcomes may come in different ways and may be shown by different children because you are offering a different way for them to learn. It is an exciting way for the children. It can be an exciting way for you to discover how children who never normally demonstrate any of the skills that may be required in the desired outcomes are demonstrating this in a different way because of the flow that has been engaged with the approach to an activity. Now, the whole idea about in the moment planning is you don't pre-plan activities, but sometimes we do need to have something to start the spark and let it go. So although we have free flow, we can also have some activities that can be initiated by you, the adult, and then we look at the options to how we get children motivated. So one of the things that we know is that when children start to play, we often have the agenda of what we think children need to learn, but we need to step back. We need to have a place where we can let children go with what they are. We look at developmental place in time. We have schematic play. We think of what children should be learning next, but we also want children to go with how they feel about what they're using at their time. These are teachable moments where children can go deeper into their play and also look at things from a different angle. So what if children play with the same resources over and over again? Well, they are deeply engaged and they're looking for a different outcome every time they play with the same resources. So sometimes we're tempted to move them on because we think that they're not interested in anything else. But if we understand enough about play, what we do realize is that for some children, like reading a book, they'll do it over and over again until they've reached that point of satisfaction, then they want to leave it. Also, that children can be inviting you into their play. And that's another thing that we need to be mindful of, is that when children are in this emerging state of play and enjoying it, that we can sometimes devastate that by coming in too quickly. But also we can support that with having the questions like, I wonder, could you, how about, and these all fit into the Ofsted remit on how we are promoting children and helping them with their play. So I've given you a very, very brief introduction about how we work with play, and I'm mindful of the time. But in the moment, planning can also let you observe and then document later. And you may be thinking, well, that's a lot, that might be a lot of paperwork. But what you do acquire from this paperwork that you are doing is how you can optimize and reduce down on the paperwork. Maybe there are things that you need to do that can make it easier for you to implement this methodology. But what it does help is give a high spark of interest and know what environment works for the child. Sometimes when we are working in early years, we can have a lot of corners, we can have a lot of confusion. We can take things out and reintroduce them later on. Also, you may find that the most basic components are the things that children work with well. But this type of planning also helps educators focus on the individual needs of the child. By taking time to analyze and also observe the reactions of each of the children, it is also possible to take into consideration their likes and their dislikes when creating activities. And in the moment planning optimizes the learning process by continuously molding activities according to what works best for a particular child. And this method could also ensure that the learning opportunities are enjoyable and they are meaningful, but also well suited to the child's individual development. So here you can see, what does it look like? So how does my planning look like? And we'll go a bit further in a moment where we'll look about how you, the facilitator, will work with this. What we are looking at within our planning is the child's spark, or that wow moment, the teachable moment, and the documentation. So we've spoken a lot about what children are doing in the moment planning, But we also need to consider what are the outcomes for you? What is the value for you in your setting? And also, how does it work with the child? Well, what is included? It does let the young children have choice in their learning. They are able to decide what they want to do, but also they gravitate into a style of learning that becomes familiar to them and actually optimizes their learning potential. You are the support that accompany them, but also you help them organize their tasks, but you are not dominating their tasks. And you then document what happens. But the most important part about this is stepping back. It's changing about what we think. When I opened up on the slide, you heard me say that this may sound like chaos. Of course, it's a whole new learning process for you, the practitioner, and we're also flipping how we work with children. From having that highly organized environment where we are almost navigating the children on what we want them to do, what we are doing is planning for completely different trajectories for learning. Also, we're not dismissing the importance of having these activities in place, but it's more about the desired outcomes, rethinking about what you want children to be able to achieve in this theory of in the moment planning. One of the most positive things that comes from this is the high engagement of children and their learning and following their interests. So we have to rethink about how we present activities to children. Also, those teachable moments. We as practitioners begin to learn how to recognize these. I did mention that if you've got 30, 25, 30 children in your setting, how do I do that? Well, at the moment, you've probably got some system in place where you are navigating around the children in the setting, being able to listen in and key in to those moments where you recognize that child is using key vocabulary or concepts that you have taught before. So now we're looking at teachable moments. You are navigating, is that child deeply curious about what they are doing? And can I ask him a question to just push them on a little bit further? So these are the teachable moments that we look for within our setting. Yes, children can play with the same resources. And as I've mentioned, children often go back to a resource they're comfortable with. But again, it doesn't mean that that resource can't be used in a different way. I mentioned about how children edit their play and they go back to something they've done before, do exactly the same thing that we think, but then they're actually editing it and refining it and getting it to a point where they feel comfortable with it. So again, we have to understand that revisiting play or revisiting a resource isn't that that child has a very narrow vision about how to use that resource, but they're looking for a desired outcome that they haven't reached yet. And also, we need to understand that sometimes we need to be invited into a child's play. A child's play is a very unique area to them where they're going through that moment of curiosity and puzzlement. They're also in their zone of learning. And we have to be careful that we don't interfere with that. We don't cross into that moment where that spark or that wow moment could be gone. And also with the high engagement is what you can see from the sessions as you move on and move on. So again, flipping things around a different way and looking at how we can work with children and how optimized this is. Now, the environment. Some of the questions I often get is about how does the environment work? Do we have to change the environment hugely within the setting? No, children just need to have access to all the areas. However, what we do need to understand is that children also need to have rules and boundaries. So, in establishing an in the moment setting also means that children can understand there's free flow, but you also have to put in place things that are acceptable and unacceptable within the settings environment. So children can keep safe, but also they know the limits of what they can and cannot do. And this is also for health and safety reasons as well. So also about in the moment is extending it to the outside so that children can go from inside to outside or navigate around where their interest lies. Also, we need to consider age-appropriate resources. We don't want them going out of their learning zone. And also open-ended opportunities, as I've mentioned, like blocks or even pebbles. And things like loose parts are brilliant for this because, again, children can go back and the investment in loose parts materials means that they can make it into anything they want. But more than anything, we want children to feel secure in their environment. And this comes down to us making sure that they can play safely, but also that what they are doing goes back to the rules and the boundaries that we keep to keep health and safety within the setting. Yes, we do want children playing with natural resources. We do want them to have movable assets that they can use around, but we also have got to be careful that they are age appropriate, they're not dangerous, and also children are going to be able to maneuver them easily. And again, what you invite into the environment, again, loosely speaking, you have your agendas of what's required for ages and stages, and you invite what you bring, what you allow in your environment depends on also your trajectories that you have in your setting and your overall setting goals and outcomes. And learning about how to ask the right questions because we're often having to step back and use a different approach to how we ask questions than we did before. So the practitioner will take notice of what a child is doing, and that is when we're noticing the teachable or the spark moment. Now, this comes with practice, with training, and it doesn't happen overnight. If you're going to take on the approach of in the moment planning, you do have to have some training in place. And also, you've got to make sure that the teachers are fully on board. By understanding what the teachable moment is, this is the opportunity for the practitioner or the teacher to be able to try and extend the interest. And I'm talking a lot about this moment of extending because sometimes it can be done incorrectly. But what we are looking at is understanding a way that that child that you know can be helped further with that learning or teachable moment. So this is where we have that intimate knowledge we know from children within our setting and how it's going to work. Sometimes you will know that there is one child that works really well with that engagement with you asking, and how does that work? And I wonder, what if, and have you considered? And then there are some children that just need affirmation of what they're doing is great, and let them get on with it. They don't want too much intervention. So I'm just checking the time. They don't want too much intervention. So what is the best way to implement this? Well, teachers are constantly playing alongside the child. That is a given. Play, I mean observing, but also engaging silently. You don't even have to speak. You could be doing your own play alongside a child, which can be a very comfortable thing for a child while they're in that moment, in their learning zone, to have somebody next to them that are playing with the same resources, and that can also promote engagement. Knowing your child, their development, and also ages and stages, because if you have a child born in January and another child in December, of course, their learning arc is going to be completely different. And also the individuals of that child are emerging as they are growing. But also we've got to be aware of other things like the pedagogy and also what the child is able to do and play theory. And that children are in that moment. And this is a big thing about getting the questions, letting children ask the questions, because it's not like if you go on this, you're listening to me now, and tomorrow you've got a question, you think, oh, I needed to ask that. Children don't have that ability. But what we are asking is that children are prompted to have the possibility of asking a question at that moment, satisfying that curiosity and also that puzzlement while they're in that moment of engagement. And also that we are observing and we can build on that child's interest. And that is not to say that if I've had 3 great days of James playing with the Lego, that I want him to continue to play with the Lego. But what he has learned from building with Lego, he is now using with wood or pebbles or sticks or somewhere else. I am observing how he is transposing that skill from one area to another. I haven't planned it. It's come organically, but I'm aware of it. And also about the list that we have to use mentally about how we implement it. It's critical about observation, clearly, but also have a general plan. Have an idea of where you want to get to. And the general plan here means are the steps that you are going to use for yourself. And this means about having observation, that you are making those mental notes. And again, we don't do the note taking till after. So you may have to rely on sometimes just having some sticky notes in a pocket and a pencil to just make sure that you are writing down things that are unique to a child at that moment, because generally children might be doing the same thing. And you might want to expand on that to give insights as you move further on. And also have a general broad plan, and that means that you have in mind several activities that could happen in that day if children's spark is promoted. If, for example, I'm putting birdseed in the feeder box and children become curious about what I am doing, it's then like, how do I promote that spark? You know, what are you doing? I'm putting seeds in the feeder box, and getting children to be engaged in that moment of me doing something. It may not be a planned thing. It may just be something that I've decided to do that needed to be done, and children spark their interest and the curiosity is there. But also, it can, now I'm contradicting myself a little bit, there can be a general theme, there can be a goal in mind. And this is sometimes to support things like festivities or themes where we do want children to have a great understanding about the outside world. But I will say that in the moment planning considers what children need to know, what we, or not what we think they need to know, because they are very young, and also about how you can reflect and adjust. Now, the documentation, as I've mentioned, means that you put down what you have recognized after the planning. And again, this takes some detail, but we don't have time for it this morning. But what it does mean is that you write down the child's name, the area that you found them having their moment of interest, which might be sand play or mud play or loose parts area, and what you saw as the teachable moment. Also, while we're doing that, it's how teachers are trained in this environment with working with children, and it doesn't happen overnight. And it's a big leap from practitioners going from having that safe, secure, everything is planned down to the minute detail, to saying you've got to transpose from that and we're going to go. It can take up to a year to get in the moment planning working successfully and having teachers on board with the right training. And also, you also have to agree that it's the approach that you want to have within your setting, and that teachers and practitioners are comfortable with this. And also the time to make it work, because there will be errors, and also there will be a learning curve for parents who are used to having a well-organized environment where they think that children will be in their zones for corners for learning, to be freed up and have a different way. And also what we're allowing is children to do things that they probably wouldn't be allowed to do within their normal setting. So the challenges for using this method generally start with the team. Because it's so a different way, it means that we're taking planning in the traditional sense and reversing it around. I like the word flipping. And also it's about how we give the team the right guidance, and also the understanding of how in the moment planning can become a very smooth operation within your teaching environment. Also, that the paperwork is different, a completely new approach for a lot of team members, and having support on how to do this. Because we have to have records on children's development within the setting, but also how to address this for Ofsted. So it comes with the senior practitioner understanding how it works, deeply invested in modeling that, and then letting it go. What if everyone doesn't agree with the change? Again, this can be a tricky concept within a setting, and it has to be done over a period of time. It can't be, let's flip from one day to another. And this is where pacing yourselves and having in the moment planning days or mornings where staff who are not completely on board can see the benefits of it and work with the team in a way of understanding how it can be beneficial. So this is where I say you need to give yourself a timeline and also work with practitioners who are not particularly sure. And documenting it,
Okay.
it's not you. It's you're still having to document what children are doing, but it's a slightly different way. And again, what we are doing is looking at an alternative way of looking at children's curiosity and outcomes. But instead of having all those pre-planned concepts there, we're saying this is what happened in this environment and this is what the child did. So it is flipping it around a little bit. And also, as a team, you need to have time to discuss because remember what you saw James do with the Lego one morning. Somebody else, a practitioner, may have seen James do something different on another morning and asked a different question. So, this is where we're evaluating what the child is doing and how they are learning. It helps us build up a bigger picture about the child and optimizing their learning. Very
Excuse
quickly,
me, I
yes,
didn't want to interrupt, but I kindly want to remind you that you have 5 minutes left for the presentation.
we have
Thank
5
you.
minutes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm nearly there, yeah. And so
Thank
the
you.
yeah, so the documentation, as you can see here, is all about the spark and the wow moment and mapping the interest. Now, I'm sure now you've got the general idea that it's not too difficult, but if you focus on that spark or that wow moment, as we call it here, it's how you can build on that teachable moment. And this is what we're looking for all the time in the whole method and the whole approach. It's not changing your environment too much, but equally just looking at how we can take what we have in the environment and using it for the child's interest. And as time is going, I'm just going to revise some of the considerations that we need to have is that it's not as difficult as it sounds. It's really simple, to be honest. And we got to start with the assumption that every child wants to be curious and have puzzles and enjoy themselves. But more than anything, that the children are emotionally secure about what they're doing and how they enjoy it. The environment is critical because not having everything out there, even if you have a pack away setting where you have the most basic components, it's about how you display it and how you let children integrate with it and how you are just there navigating your relationship with the child, but also knowing as a practitioner when to intervene and have as few transitions as possible. I know that meal times or snack times, it might be difficult to have them in the moment planning, but see how this can work so you're not stopping the flow. And also that parents are supportive about how this works in your setting. So I'm aware of the time and we've come to the end just in time, I think, Lena. And there's a great quote here saying, children learn as they play. And most importantly, in play, children learn how to learn, which is critical more than anything. So this has been, I'm going to stop sharing now. And this has been kind of a very, very quick introduction to in the moment planning. And I'm pretty sure that some of you are recognizing, well, I kind of do this in my classroom anyway. But what we're looking at in early years is stepping away from everything being so completely planned and tightly constricted to letting it go with flow. So any questions?
Amazing. Thank you very much, Yvonne. So if anybody has a question, they can write it on the chat box or they can just open their mics to learn more of this amazing presentation. It is amazing that we encourage discovery and that we, as teachers, just sit back and observe and inspire. That's an amazing point of view.
Well, it can be a scary one as well because
Yeah.
we're always worried about that loss of control. And as I mentioned in the session, you do have to have some boundaries and limitations that children realize they can't be throwing stones around. They can't be being physical with other children. We do need to have that health and safety in place. But it's also, if you, I'm a very big fan of loose parts. If you are aware of the loose parts theory, where children can go back, and I love this phrase of editing what they did the day before or last week, going back and taking what they've learned from that in the moment spark and wow, and then building on that and building on that. So it's a nice way for children to become very independent and engaged thinkers, and asking why and looking at the why. And that's what we want, right? We want children who are going to be invested in why they are learning and what they are learning. So I'll ask the people who are here, would you find this something you may try in your classrooms? A thumbs up. It can be a non-verbal or long linguistic response. You could just put an emoji. Is it something that you would try in your classroom? Or are you trying it in your classroom? Or are you doing it in one way or another? You could just put a thumbs up in the chat or let me know. And also, if it may be, can be implemented only in the kids' classroom or adults' class. I would say that now that you have seen it, you can see also how it can work really well with adults. And that's why I'm saying that probably some of you are recognizing aspects of this within your infant, primary, secondary, and adult teaching, that just giving that moment of not intervening and allowing for that curiosity, that way that children or adults can learn. And one of the things that I'm deeply invested in is understanding how children have their emerging learning styles and how we are touching this all the time. So that's a very good point, that it can be used with adults as well. And yeah, thank you. And also your relationship with teaching adults will know how to navigate using that. But then the most important part of that with anything, with any area, is how are you recording the observations and how will you build on that? So if an adult has found a way to work with a particular theory or a concept that you're delivering, how are you going to build on that? Because we may see it only with one adult or with one child, but be sure that's probably going to happen again and again with other children at different points of their learning. So that's a very interesting point you've brought up there. So thank you, Aisha. Any other questions? Well, as this session is coming to an end, what I would say is, if you're going to look at in the moment planning, also look at loose parts. And loose parts is a wonderful way for children to use resources that have no particular reason. They're pebbles, feathers, they're editable resources, and they work really well with in the moment planning. But basically, what we are trying to do is get children to actually follow through the thought process. At the moment, everything is delivered on a screen or in a package or on a book. And we want children to go back to basics, to start that line of curiosity and enjoy learning. What could be better than that? So, Lena, I think maybe, thank you for giving me the time and the space to share. And it's been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very insightful presentation, and thank you for having the time to share these amazing ideas.
Oh, thank you. And I look forward to meeting you all again. So goodbye for now and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.